I did it. I finally finished my master's thesis, and I have a ton of free time now, and there's a really popular video game series that just had a new installment released, so it would be a really good way to take advantage of like all the increased press and the YouTube algorithm if I made a video about that series. Too bad I'm making a video about a completely different and not at all newsworthy game from like 3 years ago. For one of my grad school classes, we read The Great Derangement, which is an essay from Amitav Ghosh. In this essay, he's basically like, hey, isn't it weird that considering how big climate change is and how it's already affecting and is going to continue to affect so much of our lives, that novels and stories don't really mention climate change all that much unless it's like future-oriented sci-fi. It seems like at some point in the future people are gonna look back on this and be like, wow, it's weird they didn't mention it at all. Almost like they were deranged, like a great derangement. Hence the title. To which me and my gamer brain was like, oh, the derangement like in Horizon Zero Dawn? Like with the robots?
But even an outcast knows about the derangement of the machines, right? How they get deadlier every year?
The derangement in Horizon Zero Dawn is completely different from what Ghosh is talking about. But that got me thinking.
Alright, this promises to be interesting.
Horizon Zero Dawn's approach to climate change is really nuanced and is one that I haven't seen in a lot of other pieces of media. And yes, even though it is future-oriented apocalyptic sci-fi, the way it treats climate change can serve as an example for how to do it in other stories.
I suspect we're about to learn a great deal.
Anyone who's played the game will know that the apocalypse in Horizon Zero Dawn comes from out-of-control biomass-eating robots.
And at the rate it's replicating, Ted, it will strip the Earth bare in 15 months. We're not talking fall of civilization, we're talking extinction.
I get it, Liz.
Not climate change itself. So it doesn't really show up in the main plot all that much. Most of Horizon's climate change lore shows up in either environmental storytelling or the data points, the emails, and the recordings and the advertisements you find littered throughout the game world. And also specifically from my sweet, sweet robot angel, Cyan. I love you. Horizon Zero Dawn's timeline is already pretty whack. There's the far future stuff, which is where you're actually playing the game and where Aloy exists. There's the big chunk of dead planet, you know, from the robots.
Extinction.
I get it, Liz.
But you also have the near future bit. So like all the climate change stuff obviously is happening in this time. Not this time. Horizon presents climate change in 2 stages. The die-off, which is exactly what it sounds like, and the clawback, which is also exactly what it sounds like.
What are you talking about?
The die-off includes the years between 2017 to the mid-2040s. During this chunk of time is when most of the bad effects of climate change take place, and the data points really like to focus on sea level rise. In real life, the IPCC predicts that global average sea levels will rise anywhere from 30 to 110 centimeters by 2100, depending on how much we limit our greenhouse gas emissions. Horizon fudges these numbers a bit, but you know, it's for the sake of probably fitting their game timeline. In the game universe, Singapore is uninhabitable by the 2020s, the Azores are underwater by 2033, and we don't get specific years, but it also happens to New Zealand and the Bahamas. That's not saying that in real life, those countries and other island nations and other coastlines aren't already going to be feeling effects of sea level rise in the next couple of decades, but you know, the game probably sped it up a little bit. I specifically want to point out how Horizon talks about Singapore. With approximately a third of the island nation at less than 5 meters above sea level, Singaporeans were forced to abandon their homes as inexorable waters leached away their foundations throughout the snoring 20s. People often talk about how sea level rise is going to put stuff underwater, but the way this data point describes it is closer to what the effects are actually going to look like. Sea level rise means increased frequency and increased intensity of high tides and intense storms. So places are going to, and have already been, flooding more often, which causes problems with infrastructure like housing and roadways and stuff like that. It's not exactly the snorkelable undersea wonderland that the word underwater usually implies. So good on Horizon for, you know, doing a little bit of detail there. Within the Horizon lore, during the die-off, there's also a lot of mention of species dying off. We see this in the Yellowstone Visitor Center that you can explore. We see this in a data point that says that grizzly bears went extinct. Also in data point 10, someone who I can only assume is Pleakley for Lilo and Stitch is like really upset that mosquitoes went extinct.
I guess the old ones like these animals.
Which, the likelihood of mosquitoes going extinct is very, very slim, but there are a lot of very valid extinction concerns about climate change in our world. This includes loss or degradation of important habitats and microhabitats, changing of environmental thresholds beyond what species can tolerate, loss of important interactions between two unrelated species or arrival of new negative ones, the disruption of environmental cues such as those for breeding or migration, and direct loss of life due to weather events. 35% of birds, 52% of amphibians, and 71% of warm water reef-building coral species meet these criteria and are considered climate change susceptible.
I find the loss of megafaunal species unaccountably sad.
The mosquito data point also mentions that there are certain emergent viruses that come up because of climate change, which is something that the World Health Organization is actually concerned about. For example, if you have increased temperature and increased precipitation, disease vectors like mosquitoes have more places to breed and therefore more opportunities to spread more viruses. There are also references throughout the data points to drought and famine, which unfortunately is also based in reality. The UN's Food and Agricultural Organization already considers climate change one of the leading causes of rising global hunger, which leads us into the socio-political effects of climate change.
I feel substantial anxiety, Aloy.
You and me both, Cyan.
This is actually what got me interested in talking about Horizon and climate change in the first place. It's hard to get people to understand in real life that climate change is not just droughts and floods and hurricanes and species dying, but that it's gonna hurt people and potentially cause conflict. Horizon does not shy away from talking about that conflict. Within the world of Horizon Zero Dawn, you get conflicts over resources, but also a lot of mentions of climate refugees. Climate refugees are people who have been displaced in the context of disasters and climate change, but the UN Refugee Agency points out that this term doesn't really refer to anything within international law and is mostly used in the media and other discussions. It was actually a little bit shocking for me to see this term come up in the game's lore because it was something that I had never seen outside of my classes or like environmental news sites. Honestly, the best overview of climate change in the entire game comes from Cyan.
What kind of upheaval caused such loss of life?
There were many factors. Forced migrations, food shortages, collapsed economies, refugee crises, conflict over resources. But these stemmed from one cause: catastrophic climate change that greatly reduced the habitable surface area of the Earth.
So there wasn't enough room for people on the whole Earth?
Yes. Billions were displaced and millions perished, as much as 20% of the global population.
So like I mentioned before, climate change doesn't cause the apocalypse in Horizon. The robots do.
How could I forget?
Which means that within the game universe, we fix climate change. Sort of. There is a renewed focus to fix the environmental damage during the clawback.
So things got better. For a little while at least.
Yes. These crises instigated many advances in automation, green robot technologies, and artificial intelligence. Firebreak was one of dozens of ecological restoration and disaster relief projects in North America alone.
People in the near future in Horizon's world address climate change through a combination of new technology and policy and behavior shifts. One climate intervention AI is the mysterious Vast Silver, which went rogue and is what led to the creation of the Turing Act, which is the whole thing with Cyan being too smart. But also, apparently, Vast Silver might still be around. Ooh, future plot points.
Things just keep getting stranger.
The new automation also includes Cyan and Firebreak, paid for by our apocalypse-causing friend, Ted Farrow.
Mr. Farrow spearheaded initiatives that reversed the global decline. At one point, he was feted in the media as the man who saved the planet.
Guessing they wound up regretting that one.
You built a line of killer robots.
Peacekeepers.
With all of the lava imagery and lava robot monster things that attack you, it might be easy to forget that Firebreak itself was started as a way to get geothermal energy out of Yellowstone. One data point mentions polar ice reconstitution, and I can only like think of that clip from Futurama. There's a windmill farm on the edge of the Nora Sacred Lands. Some data points talk about virtual instead of like actual vacations, you know, like no plane emissions. Dodd Blevins, the like asshole security guard from Firebreak.
This is Director of Security Blevins.
Dies on a snowmobile, and the fact that the snowmobile is powered by gas is like weird to people, because by that point, like, why is it gas? We don't use that anymore. Some text points also talk about people moving away from meat, and lab-grown meats replacing farm-grown meats. While the game itself doesn't specifically link this to climate change, it is related. Meat production is a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions. One study from 2011 found that lab-grown meat could produce 78 to 96% lower greenhouse gas emissions than conventional meat production. Let us not forget Odyssey. Odyssey is a group of rich people who thought that the Horizon Zero Dawn project wasn't going to work and set up a spaceship supposed to send a bunch of human embryos to a distant planet to populate it later, similar to the Eleuthia project in Horizon. Data point 63 hints that Odyssey started out as a way for these rich people to avoid the climate crisis, which that's probably a statement on how people of privilege are kind of in the best position to avoid the most disastrous effects of climate change personally, but I digress. So the clawback ends up working to an extent. Humanity is able to bounce back and continue on, climate refugees are able to return home, and everybody lives happily ever after until the robot apocalypse.
Extinction.
I get it, Liz.
Asterisk. I do want to point out that in real life, the IPCC says that even if we do totally drastically cut our greenhouse gas emissions, sea level rise is probably going to continue well past 2100. So Horizon took some artistic liberties with sea level rise going back down that fast, but yeah. Guerrilla Games did not have to include climate change in the lore of Horizon Zero Dawn. Once they decided their apocalypse was going to be robot-based, there was no need from a narrative perspective that you had to include climate change. But they did include climate change. You can even argue that climate change sort of helped spawn the robot apocalypse because of the increased reliance on automation during the clawback. By including climate change, Guerrilla made their story richer and fuller and honestly more scientifically believable. And the game covers it stunningly well, and with a level of realism, especially considering the game's about, like, robot dinosaurs. The lore within the game as a whole is based in believable scientific rationale that extends into how climate change is presented. And sure, this story is set in the future, and sure, it is science fiction and apocalyptic, but in my opinion, this is exactly in the spirit of what Ghost is getting at in The Great Derangement. Horizon including climate change, even though it did not have to, acts as a normalizing force, not only helping players contextualize how it might affect their own futures, but also serving as an example for other storytellers and how they might want to approach climate change in their works.
That's all I need to know.
Are you sure? You can never learn too much.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm hoping I'll have time to make more videos now that I don't have a 100-page paper on plastic pollution looming over my head anymore. My name is Savannah and I use they them pronouns. You should like, you should subscribe. Again, I'm gonna do more things. Comment. I should probably name all of those the same thing, but they're not named all the same thing right now, and that's okay because I'm not perfect. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!
I could only grasp some of what they said.